Allen family. God loves you.
Sing about His goodness. Sing about His grace. Sing of how someday we'll behold our Savior's face. Tell me about the trials He's brought you through. Is there something within me I don't know about you? It makes me wanna smile when I hear of heaven waiting me on the other side. It makes me wanna cry when I am reminded of how Jesus gave His life. It makes me wanna sing when I hear He's coming back, and I know it won't be long. I get a little excited when I hear a good old gospel song. Gospel song. Sing about the pathway that led Him to the cross. Sing about the victory Jesus won and Satan lost. Tell me how He proved He was God alone. I want to hear how the angels rolled away the stone. It makes me want to smile when I hear of heaven waiting me on the other side. It makes me want to cry when I am reminded of how Jesus gave His life. It makes me want to sing when I hear He's coming back, and I know it won't be long. I get a little excited. I get a little excited. I get a little excited. When I hear a good old gospel song. Gospel song.
The Pine Ridge Boys. When I hear a good old gospel song.
A beggar named Lazarus lay by the gate, so sick and so hungry. And angels from heaven surrounded his body and took him away. One day on the roadside, Elijah was walking and looked into heaven. Saw chariots of fire in a whirlwind from heaven. He left here to stay. I may be carried away by angels right into glory. I may be taken by chariots of fire forever to stay. I may be walking along with God and step into heaven. However I go, it's only through Jesus, for He is the way. Enoch was walking one day with the Lord, alone by the roadside. His only desire was to please God above, to be right in His sight. God asked him to spend the day with Him, so they stepped into heaven. His body is gone, he's spending the day where there's never a night. My body may lie in a cold, dark grave, awaiting His coming. From dust it was made, to dust will return, but still in God's care. Or the trumpet may sound while living today, and in the sky we'll see Jesus. The dead will first rise, then we that remain will be met in the air. I may be carried away by angels right into glory. I may be taken by chariots of fire
The Mark Trennell Trio. However I Go.
When the job that you've had so long ceases to exist, and the paycheck that it brought each week fades with the mist, the times are getting harder, the wolf is at the door, and you're thinking that you just can't take this anymore. Then one morning the phone rings, the wife says it's for you. It's a man down at the plant, says he's got a job to do. Work is really steady, money's pretty good. Then you start thanking Jesus like you know you should. It's a God thing. He'll take you in his arms and he'll hold you, keep you safe from harm, and he'll dry away every tear that's rolling down your face. It's a God thing. He'll provide all your needs. He'll protect you while you're out there sowing seeds, and you'll know that you're covered by his amazing grace. It's a God thing. Doctor walks in the room, only shakes his head. He says there's nothing we can do. He's standing there by your bed. It gets you to thinking, could this really be the end? Then you start thinking about all your family and friends, all those prayers going up to heaven every day. Then the doctor comes by, says he's got something to say. He's staring right back at you, and he's wearing a big old grin. Then you start thanking Jesus all over again. It's a God thing. He'll take you in his arms and he'll hold you, keep you safe from harm, and he'll dry away every tear that's rolling down your face. It's a God thing. He'll provide all your needs. He'll protect you while you're out there sowing seeds, and you'll know that you're covered by his amazing grace. It's a God thing. It's a God thing. He'll provide all your needs. He'll protect you while you're out there sowing seeds, and you'll know that you're covered by his amazing grace. It's a God thing. It's a God thing. It's a God thing.
Anthony Bollinger. It's a God thing.
This is Affirm Southern Gospel Radio.
So, you've got an idea for a business, the store of your dreams. There's just one thing to figure out: everything. That's why Shopify's all-in-one commerce platform makes it easy to sell online, in person, and everywhere else. Sell on social media, source products with an app to get that first sale feeling. It's the only solution that gives you everything you need to sell everywhere you want. So when you're ready to bring your idea to life, power it up with Shopify.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/listen.
You've got questions? O'Reilly Auto Parts has answers. Need a pro you can trust? We've got that too. No matter what you need, our professional parts people have the training and expertise to help you do things right. Deep automotive knowledge. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Macy's VIP sale is here. Use your coupon or Macy's card and take an extra 30% off the latest spring looks from top designer brands. Plus, get 15% off go-to beauty, skincare, and fragrances. Macy's Star Rewards members earn on every purchase, except gift cards, services, and fees. More at Macys.com/Star Rewards. Savings off regular sale and clearance prices. Exclusions apply.
When something happens to your kitchen, you might say,
This is ludicrous.
but that won't fix your home. That will only get you the rapper, Ludacris.
Having trouble? Don't panic. Don't be alarmed. You need to file a claim? Holla at State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
That's right. You can file a claim on the app or call us.
Thanks, Mr. Chris.
No matter how
Good morning, everybody. Time we'll go ahead and get started. Nice to see everybody out today. Everybody's fussing about the weather we had all last week. You know, that pretty white stuff. Good, good. I'm glad you were thinking about me. Glad you were thinking about me. All right, nice everybody out this morning. Let's, before we start on the Sunday school lesson, let's go ahead and go to prayer this morning. Anybody anywhere have a spoken request? Okay, all right. Ruby? Good. All right. Scotty?
Bobby Joe's mom was passing.
Yeah. All right.
Says she is.
Ronnie?
Remember me and my family, remember my two brothers, remember Ray Hicks, Brother Jimmy Plumley, and continue to remember Taylor before she first called claiming yesterday, I think. And keep her in the prayer, and remember Debbie this morning.
Okay. Jamie?
Remember my grandson Luke, he's traveling. My daughter, her family's traveling. My son's traveling. I remember Sue Ayers, remember me and my family. And Marvin has got, I don't know, he's really bad congestion and he's sick. And he's miserable, so please, everybody just pray for him.
Sure will. Yes, sir.
We always stand in need of prayers. I've got a good friend, Tony Connor, in North Carolina, has recently had prostate cancer, and things not looking real good for him as far as lab work. Just let him in prayers.
All right. Scott?
Kim's brother, going through a lot of health issues, a lot of tests, and no answer yet. And she's on her way back from there right now. So that's very
All right. Mason?
Mark, we always
You guys remember Trish in your prayers as well. She's going to have double knee replacement surgery the first week of June. I know it's a little bit out, but we can still pray for her now. All right, anybody else with a spoken request?
Always remember my family.
Yes, Bruce.
Remember Israel in prayer. Remember John and her family.
All right. I'm sure everyone has unspoken prayer requests. I'll stand if you would, please. Well, John, you mind leading this morning? Heavenly Father, this wonderful day you've given us, thank you, God, for bringing us all together in your house, that we might lift up the name of your Son, Jesus. We are just thankful for this privilege, this blessing that you've given to each one of us. Thank you, Lord, for giving us each the desire to be here. Father, we ask, as always, you would forgive us where we sin against you. Forgive us where we fail one another, Lord. We just pray for your cleansing through the blood of Jesus. Now we ask you to hear this prayer requests that are going up this morning. Let us feel your peace and comfort, Lord. We pray as we go through our individual struggles. Help us this morning as we present your Sunday school lesson. Hope I do it in a way that brings glory to you. Brings maybe a little knowledge and wisdom to us. Father, we just ask that you would just bless this class and the others that are going on as well. We're thankful for all you do for us, those things we see and the ones that we don't, and those that you believe into our lives. We give thanks and praise in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. All right, before we start on the lesson, I'll ask if anybody's got a verse or passage you'd like to share with the rest of us. Okay, Bruce?
This is a reading out of the book of Psalms here, and I'm going to read Psalm number 11. In the Lord put I my trust. I'll say ye to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain. For lo, the wicked bend their bow. They make ready their arrow up on the string, that they may privily shoot at the divided heart. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord crieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence his soul hateth. Upon the wicked he shall rain snares and fire and brimstone, and an honorable tempest, this shall be the portion of their cup. For the righteousness of the Lord liveth righteousness, his conscience doth behold the upright.
Amen. Thank you, Bruce. Anybody else? All right. The title of our lesson this morning is Preaching Through Parables. And we're going to be in the 4th chapter of Mark this morning. It's on page 36 in your booklets if you haven't already got there. So this morning we're going to be studying about Jesus' use of parables to teach or to preach to a large group of listeners. So the first thing, you read parables and you say, well, okay, sometimes the parables weren't clear. Sometimes it's nice just to know what a parable is, right? So what is a parable? Anybody know?
Something that's compared to something else, compared to something else.
Okay. It's a simple story used to illustrate a moral or a spiritual lesson. This is the simplest definition of what a parable is. Are parables an effective method of teaching? Can be, can't they? There's a lot of different methods of teaching. Preaching, teaching. Parable is one way that Jesus did it, that he chose to teach or to get across some truth or some lesson. But just like the parable that we're going to be studying about, in our lesson this morning, the results vary a great deal, don't they? The parable of the sower is what we're talking about this morning. I think it's probably one of the first parables that most Christians hear or listen to or study anything about. This parable is really more about what's being sown than it is about the sower in this case, all right? So we're going to go ahead and read. We're going to do something a little different this morning than the way I normally do this. I want to read the text first before we get too deep into any of the discussion. And I think it makes more sense as we go through it like this. I'll read the first verse. You guys read after me. We start in Mark chapter 4, verse 3. It skips over a few verses in the middle, but we'll just keep reading straight through. So in verse 3, he says, "Hearken, behold, there went out a sower to sow. And some fell on stony ground, where it had not much earth, and immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth.
But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away.
And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no fruit.
And others fell on good ground, and did yield fruit that sprang up and increased, brought also some 30, some 60, and some 100.
The sower soweth the word.
And these are they by the wayside, where the word is sown. But when they have heard, Satan cometh immediately, and taketh away the word that was sown in our hearts.
And these are they likewise which are sown on stony ground, who, when they have heard the word, immediately receive it with gladness.
And have no root in themselves, and so endure but for a time afterwards. When affliction or persecution arises for the word's sake, immediately they are offended.
And these are they which are sown among thorns, such as hear the word,
And he cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lust of other things entering in, choke the word, and it becometh unfruitful.
And these are they which are sown on good ground, such as hear the word and receive it, and bring forth fruit, some 30-fold, some 60, and some 100. Amen. All right, let's set the scene for what's going on here. Obviously, this is Jesus giving the parable here. He's talking. He's trying to illustrate a spiritual truth that the people need to understand. And it's funny, he's actually teaching about teaching or preaching about preaching when you think about it, right? So Jesus is drawing, as his ministry has really gotten into full swing, his popularity, his attention is getting captured by more and more people as the news of his message, his gospel message, and the miracles that he's been performing along the way has kind of spread ahead of him. You know, we say this all the time, teaching. There's different times. You didn't have news channels and internet and text messages and get all this stuff out. All of this was going around by word of mouth. A couple of people would hear Jesus speak, and then they'd talk to say, hey, you guys really need to come listen to what this guy's saying. Now, sometimes their intentions were great, sometimes not so much. Man, you got to hear what this guy's saying. There was different ways that it was received. But he continues to draw a larger and larger and larger crowd. Everywhere he goes now, there's people following, and when he stops to speak or whatever, there's just a huge group of people that are gathering around. So he and his followers, at the beginning of this chapter, they've come by the seashore, the side of the sea, and there's it describes it as a great multitude has gathered. Now, we don't know how many people a great multitude is, but let's say it's more than what's in this church. Okay, they've got a large number of people sitting around to hear Jesus, to listen to what he's got to say. So it's gotten too crowded for him to just stand in the middle. Let's say it's 100 people. Let's say it's 1,000 people. We don't know. You think he'd be very effective if he just stood in the middle and everybody's standing around him in a big circle? No, they couldn't understand what he was saying. He couldn't speak to a group that large. So he gets onto a boat that's tied just off the shore there. Got a little space between, the boat and the land. So all the people, think of it as an amphitheater almost. So he's got all these people on the seashore. He's sitting on a boat or standing on the boat, whichever the case is. Now he can address the crowd face to face and present whatever message he's talking to them, right? It's, anybody in here ever had to make a presentation for a large group of people? I know Tim has. I know that Luke has. Anybody? A group bigger than this group? Yeah. It's funny. You get all your material together. You got all your notes together. You stand in front of a group of people like this. And you look across at your audience and you kind of get started, right? You start talking, whatever it is, giving your presentation. In addition to Sunday school teaching. I have to do sales presentations as well. When I worked at the 911 center, I had to do training presentations and have all kinds of people. But when you're looking at the faces, like what I'm doing now, and I'm sure that Luke can attest to this, you notice a couple of things about the faces looking back at you. Anybody guess what one of the first things you notice is?
Am I really that boring?
Not everybody is paying the same level of attention, right? Some people are listening. They're interested in what you got to say. They're hanging on to every word. Now, think of it. All of this plays right into the parable of the sower, okay, what I'm saying right now. Just this type of presentation, exactly what Jesus was doing. And when you look out at the faces, some of you are like, okay, Mark, I get what you're saying. It's, okay, Mark, can you shut up? We really want to go to the next thing, whatever it is, all right? Some people pay attention, some people don't. You're going to have some people's interest, some people you're not. Why is that? I did such a good job of preparing. Why is everybody not paying the same amount of attention?
Whatever their interest is, really.
All right, thank you. Okay, anybody?
Everybody's attention span, I think, is different.
The attention span, yep. A lot of different things. You know, the bottom line is when I look out at a crowd of people or a group of people to make a presentation to speak to address in some way, and, you know, anybody that stands in front of people and presents something, I would think could attest to this. It's not one group of people. You are not this one entity, right? Everybody in here is completely individual and different. All of the things that, like Don had mentioned, our interests are all different. Our attention span is different. Our influences, our background, the way we were brought up, the things that we have preconceived notions about, all of those things make us different. So we're not all going to listen, be interested in, absorb, take away the exact same thing, even though the presenter, the sower, is presenting the exact same message, the exact same material to every one of you will take it differently. Do you think that was any different in Jesus' day? No. Of course, unlike me, he was smart enough to know this. You know, the first time you get up and you make a presentation to somebody, you're just dumbfounded that everybody wasn't just hanging on to your every word. I worked so hard on this. But that's just the way it goes. Everybody's hearing the same words. Those words are being processed differently by everybody in the room, everybody in the audience listening. They don't learn the same way. They don't absorb it the same way. They don't understand it the same way. And we're all affected by different life experiences. So again, the presenter, the speaker, is giving a single presentation. It's the same message going out to everybody, whether it's a sales pitch, whether it's training, whether it's this kind of teaching, whether it's Luke preaching a sermon, it's the same thing. He's speaking the same words that all of us are listening to, but we all take that in a little differently. It affects us all a little differently. And if there's a crowd of 50, 100 or 1,000 listeners, then there are probably going to be 50 or 100 or 1,000 interpretations or reactions to that material, right? Jesus knew that. You know, you have some people that you can tell are listening very intently, and you have some people who can barely keep their eyes open. Now, we have one young man, he's not here today, frequently fell asleep. Maybe it was just me. But Jesus was facing this exact same thing. So instead of speaking very plainly about his gospel message, Jesus would sometimes use parables to express a certain truth that we see here, talking to people, right? He knew that there would be some that would understand the meaning of the parable, while some would leave confused, some would not take it at all. He knew that. But Jesus' message was always exactly the same, was it not? Nothing varied in the gospel message that he was teaching. I am the way to God. You must repent, put your faith in me. That's the way to heaven, right? It was always the same, the exact same message. So in these first several verses that we had in our passage here, Jesus starts speaking about a sower doing what a sower does. What is a sower? You're scattering seeds, right? You're planting your crops, your field. Now, they didn't have all the nice technology that we have now where you hop on your John Deere and drive down through the garden and stuff's flying around behind you and nice, neat rows, and it's all planted. They would have a field that was prepared, and the sower's out there with his seed, and he's slinging seed, right? That's the way it kind of worked. We aren't told anything about the sower. We're not giving any details about who the sower is, and we find that as you look at this and as we study this, it really doesn't matter who the sower is, okay? But he's doing what he does, his job, sowing seed. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to read verses 3 through 8 again that we just read so we can see what the sower is doing, and then we're going to find out what's different about what's going on here. All right, in verse 3 it says, "Hearken, behold, there went out a sower to sow." We don't know who it is. We don't know anything else about him. "And it came to pass, as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and the fowls of the air came and devoured it up. Some fell on stony ground, where it had not much earth, and immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. And some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no fruit. Others fell on good ground, and did yield fruit that sprang up and increased, and brought forth some 30, and some 60, and some 100. All right? This was an agricultural region. Everything about what they did depended on what they could grow or raise with their own hands, right? These people provided for their communities, their families, they did whatever, but it was all pretty much agriculturally based. They all understand about sowing seeds. This is something that they could all comprehend. Everybody knew what Jesus was talking about, the sower throwing seeds and putting it here, putting it there, and what happened. So you go out, you spread your seeds. What could be easier than walking down through the garden or down through these fields and sowing seeds, right? Pretty simple. But in these verses here, we see very differing results as the sower goes along and sowing seeds. You assume they're all the same seed, it's all the same crop, it's all the same plant. He's going along and he's sowing seeds, or she, whatever. But we have different results in how the seeds came up. Why is that? We have one sower scattering out the same seeds, but things are coming up differently. What is different? You're right. What's different with this sower is the ground that he's throwing the seeds on, right? He very specifically gives us 4 different scenarios about the kind of ground that's being sown, that the seeds are being scattered on. If we look at verse 4, it says here that some of the seed fell by the wayside. Now, obviously they didn't use the same terminology for things that we use today, the same phrases for what you call things, but a wayside in the field or in the garden or whatever, however they're planting their crops here, would be considered like around the edges where people walk a lot, or even paths through and between areas of the field, if it was a huge field. So what happens to those areas? The ground gets tramped, right? A lot. People walk. You're always walking the same path. You're taking the same course, cutting through the fields and doing whatever. Obviously, that ground is packed hard from all the continuous traffic, and it's packed really hard. Well, he talks about some of the seed fell on the wayside, on those pathways, on the flattened ground. No way it's going to go into the earth, right? It's not going to soak into the ground. It's not going to have anything. So pretty soon, as soon as the, we'll come back to that. It falls on the, and it's just packed. All that ground is packed down. I'm just talking about the differences in the ground now. Verse 5 says, some fell on soil that was thin with rocks right underneath it, right? So I think we're probably all familiar with fields and places that in and around here that are just the exact same way. Anybody drive through Greenbrier County along I-64 and you look across those fields, all you see is those big rock outcrops. You say, man, no wonder they don't have all this planted. You could never get all the rock out of the field here. Verse 7 says that some of the seed fell among the thorns and the weeds, the brambles, whatever you want to call it, okay? And then finally in verse 8, we're told that some of the seed fell into good ground. Now, fertile, loose, been aerated, been whatever, it's prepared for growing, right? Good ground. So we've got 4 scenarios. We've got hard pack, we've got thin soil, we've got soil that's just nothing but thorns and weeds and stuff, and then we have the good ground. 4 entirely different kinds of ground with 4 entirely different results for what happened. Same sower, same seeds, 4 results based on where the seed fell on the ground. The sower's given the same seed, the seed's all the same. What's different is the ground that the seed fell on. Kind of like looking out at a crowd of people, giving the same presentation, the same message, and that all being absorbed differently by as many people as you hear. Because let's face it, some of us are a little hard-packed, some of us have some thin soil, some of us are a little thorny, right? The hard-packed wayside resulted in seeds just sitting on top. No way it's going to do anything. Doesn't matter how much you water it. Birds are going to come by and pick it up and eat it. And that's what happened. That's what Jesus described as what happened with the sower in this particular scenario. The thin ground over rock doesn't allow for the roots to go anywhere. There's not enough. It's not going to get nutrients. The plant can't gain strength to stand up on its own. Sprouts up okay, but as soon as the sun hits it, there's just not enough to keep it alive, and it withers and dies, right? The seeds in the brambles, the thorns, they just don't get enough nourishment. The soil was not cultivated. It's not prepared for growth. All the nutrients are being taken by these junk that's growing there, right? And so those seeds just get choked out. The plant starts to come up, but it can't get enough nutrients. It dies. Now, everybody in here that has fooled with a garden, all this made perfect sense to you, right? But Jesus wasn't just talking about gardening. He's not trying to do that. You have to imagine that the crowd is like, okay, Jesus, we came to hear you preach this message you've been preaching. We wanted to hear you talk, even his disciples. Jesus, what are you doing? And they asked him that. And in the little section that's missing out of our passage here, they asked him, Jesus, why are you teaching like that? Why are you telling that? Okay? They were a little bit confused. They wanted to know what he was doing. So as they moved away from this crowd, finally, after Jesus has given this parable, and they kind of move away, you know, he's spoken to them, and you could imagine that some people there probably took something away from what he said. Not all of them. A lot of people probably, I'm beginning to see the light, but nothing went any farther than that. So there was a very mixed reaction, just like we're talking about the seed being thrown. What kind of ground it fell on is going to determine how it's going to come up, what's going to happen with the word thrown out by the sower, right? Or that seed. So they moved away, and Jesus explained to his followers that the parable he used was exactly like speaking a truth to a diverse crowd, which is we are. We're a diverse crowd. The sower was the same, the seed was the same, but it's not always going to fall on the same ground. Just like the gospel. The gospel's like that, is it not? So Jesus was trying to use this parable of something they could all relate to, throwing seeds, some of it's going to grow, some of it's not. They knew that. But he was trying to present this to express a spiritual truth that some of them would understand, some of them would not. In the next several verses after this, Jesus told, and in that passage in between, Jesus told his disciples that some will hear and understand while others would not. He goes on and he tells them that the sower, and let me just go back and read these verses again. I'm going to read from 14 all the way to the end, and then we're going to come back and do what we just did for the first section. So the sower soweth the word. And this is Jesus speaking directly to his disciples, not the big crowd of people. They've dispersed, they've gone on. Jesus and his crowd have kind of moved away, and they're talking more intimately as a closer group. The sower soweth the word, and these are they by the wayside where the word is sown, but when they have heard, Satan cometh immediately and taketh away the word that was sown in their hearts. And these are they likewise which are sown on stony ground, who when they have heard the word, immediately receive it with gladness, and have no root in themselves, and so endure for a time, but for a time afterward, when affliction or persecution arises for the word's sake, immediately they are offended. And these are they which are sown among thorns, such as hear the word, and the cares of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches, and the lusts of other things, entering in, choke the word, and it becometh unfruitful. And these are they which are sown on good ground, such as hear the word, and receive it, and bring forth fruit, some 30-fold, some 60, and some 100. So, he tells them, the sower, the preacher, the teacher, the believer, the person speaking, could be anybody. In this particular scenario of a sower sowing the word, who could the sower be?
Us.
All of us, any of us. Are we not all charged to spread the gospel message? We are all the sower. The emphasis here is not on the sower at all. Because we are the sower doesn't place any importance on us at all. Okay? They are spreading the word. What is the word? The gospel, right? That's the seed. The gospel message is the seed that he talked about, comparing the sower. That seed is the word. The word is news of Jesus. Who Jesus is, what does he represent to us? What does he mean for us? Our salvation, our way to heaven. That's the word that us, as the sower, should be sowing, period. Sower could be any one of us. The word should always be the same. I mean, the gospel about Jesus is the gospel about Jesus, right? I don't care how many denominations there are. I don't care how many beliefs there are. The news about who Jesus is, what he did, what he represents today is the same, period. So he starts talking, and just like, it's one of the things that Jesus knew was that just like the different ground, the different listeners would each respond differently. So the ground that was represented is the rest of the world, right? Our job as sowers is to take that word and spread it on the ground. The ground, period. You don't pick what ground. I stand here and I teach Sunday school lesson. Luke preaches a sermon. Tim does Sunday school lesson. You might leave and go to your job and you stand in front of 40, 50 people and you give a training seminar. This is what we're going to do. This is how we do things now. This is our new policies. Whatever these things are, it's the speaker. The word is whatever that message is. The one thing that you can't control is the ground. You just sow your seeds. Sow your seeds. That's our job. That's what we do. The sower sows. That's what each of us as Christians is charged. We all have the same commission to do that. Every one of us. Not just the preacher, not just the Sunday school teachers, not the leaders, the board members. Everybody. We are all capable of telling an audience of people, whether that audience is 1 or 1,000, whatever that word is. The gospel truth of Jesus Christ. How do I get to heaven? What does Jesus have to do with all this? We're all capable of doing that. So he goes through and he talks just like there's different kinds of ground. All those different listeners are going to be exactly the same way. What I'm speaking here today, each one of you are going to absorb in a different way. You're all going to interpret what I say a slightly different way, the way I present it. Some of you are sitting there thinking, okay, I get what you're saying, Mark. And again, some of you are saying, I wish his Sunday school class was done so we could just go on to something else. That's just the reality of it. You're the ground. I can't control that. My job is to sow, right? All of us were supposed to do that. So he starts talking about this. He breaks it down to where the disciples can't question anything about what's going on here. He's talking about on some ground, because those seeds are just laying there and they're easy picking. Listeners, easy picking. The devil's going to come along, and before that message even has a chance to take any kind of root whatsoever, the devil's going to pluck it right out of you. It happens. I tell this story a lot. I can remember when I was saved. It was in this church back in 1996, in April 1996. And I can remember because I knew nothing about Protestant-type denominations. I was raised Catholic when I was a young child. I didn't know anything about all this whole getting saved business and whatever and what it takes to be a Christian and all this stuff. But I knew that when that invitation went out, probably 3 weeks in a row, I was supposed to answer it. And I think I've told you guys that one Sunday that I knew as soon as that invitation went out, I was going to spring right up here to my knees and I was going to be right there. And I did. But right after that, I thought, man, this is the greatest feeling in the world. I don't know if any of you remember the moment of your salvation. The weight of the world has gone off your shoulders and you think, this is what I've been passing up? This is great. But boy, I'll tell you what, the next 6 months of my life was probably the worst that I've ever lived. Because you know what? I wasn't strong. I was that hard-packed ground I was not right for sowing. We'll just put it that way. The devil jumped all over me. Every time I turned around, I'm right in the middle of doing something I know I'm not supposed to be doing. And it went like that for about 6 months. I never felt like I was in more warfare than during that 6-month period. Till finally something kind of clicked somewhere along the line. And I said, no, dummy, you're doing this wrong. And kind of got back on track. But that's what he's talking about here. That ground that's just not ready for growing. You're easy picking for the devil. And the devil's going to pick those seeds up and go with it. And nothing happens, right? On some people, they didn't really have any depth to them. There's no spiritual anything going on, no real maturity going on. They received the word, they listened to it, but because of their character, their nature, it really just prevented it from growing, right? So that's that thin soil on top of the rock that Jesus is talking about. Yes, it starts to take some effect. They heard it. They let the word into their hearts. Just not enough depth to their character to continue on, and they were easily led away. Some would be in such a worldly condition that the world would actually just choke out any growth. He talks about those being thrown among the thorns. Well, you know what? If you're thrown out among the thorns and you don't get yourself away from the thorns, you're already in trouble, right? It's hard to live a good Christian life if you surround yourself by the things of the world, the people of the world, the same influences you've had. So this is Jesus kind of breaking this down to why. This is why I used that parable to where this agricultural community could understand what I'm talking about. So that's what he did. But he knew that, the weeds, the world choked him out. There was no growth, no fruit, nothing. Finally, thankfully, there would be with some with open hearts that were ready to hear the word, to receive that seed, right? And they had open minds, they had open hearts, and that seed would sit there, it would sprout, and the roots would go deep because they were prepared. I know Luke has been teaching I don't know if it's Wednesday or Sunday, about preparing for worship. And it's kind of the same thing. Sometimes we have to prepare ourselves to, as an audience, if you've already made up your mind when you walk into the class, the lesson, the presentation, I don't want to hear this. Guess what you're going to take away? Nothing. But if you come into that class, say, you know what, or whatever it is, a speech, a whatever, and you say, you know what, I really want to hear this. I'm really interested in this. I'm going to keep an open mind about this, and I'm going to keep myself open to receive what this person is saying. What kind of results you think you're going to get? Pretty good, right? The retention is going to be better. The impact is going to be better. Jesus knew that. Jesus knew there were going to be some whose hearts would be ready. Most of the time, sadly, for the people's hearts to be ready like that, we have to be pretty well beaten up, don't we? We have to be at a pretty low point in our lives for us to finally realize, I'm lost, I need to hear this, I need to do something with this. And that's when you have that good ground that lets that message come in and take root and be productive and bear fruit, right? Jesus needed, he needed them to understand that. So that's kind of it as far as the text is concerned about Jesus talking to these different groups of people and how it's going to be interpreted. I'm sure the disciples probably sat and listened to Jesus talk and watched the crowd and probably just couldn't understand why everybody didn't feel exactly the same way they did. But Jesus knew better. He knew that there were going to be some that are going to be open like that. But there are some that are going to not either, they don't want to come out of the world, they don't have any kind of depth to them, they're already hard-hearted, they're not going to listen to any of this, the seed's just going to sit there, or the words that I say are just going to sit there, and nothing's going to go any farther than that. And that's the way it's going to be. So, why is it important for us to know this parable? What do we do with this once we know this parable of the sower? What does it have to do with us? We sow the word. That is our job, each one of us. This is just as important to us now as it was when Jesus was talking to his disciples and then sending them out to spread the gospel, 2 by 2, if you remember. He sent them out to do this. It's not changed any for us. It's our job. We sow the word. We sow Jesus, right? That's what we're talking about, the word, the gospel. That's what we are supposed to do. We cannot control the ground. Can't do a thing about it. We don't have any impact on it. You know, when I was studying this, and it made me think of something, I know we got just a couple extra minutes here. It made me think about when I had in my previous career, when I worked at the 911 center here at Beckley, we had a policy. Nothing begins or ends with the dispatcher. Nothing. I don't create a call, but I also don't do nothing with a call, right? So dispatcher's job, and if there's any dispatchers out listening in internet land, you will know, or probably back me up, 85% of what you're doing is sitting, waiting for something to happen. That 911 call, that whatever. But if somebody, our policy was, if somebody called requesting, now I don't know if they have the same policy or not, but the policy that we had back in those days was, if somebody called requesting a police officer or reporting something going on or happening, it was never, ever, ever my job to decide whether that's not a law enforcement matter, that's not this, that's not that, that's not this. I don't have to do anything with that. Nothing. Our job was to, if I took a call from somebody, I told somebody about it, period. It's not my call to make whether I do anything with it. I do something with it. I tell somebody about this, whether it's law enforcement, fire, EMS, park service, doesn't matter. If somebody calls and reports something, no matter what I think about it, it gets told to somebody. That's the policy. It's kind of the same thing with the sower. You know what? As the sower, it's not my job to decide I'm going to present it to this person, but I don't think that one's worthy. I don't think that's the right ground for me to sow my seed. I'm just going to go on over here because I think they'll listen to me. They look more Christian-like. I bet they'll listen to what I have to say. We get picky and choosy about who we're willing to share the gospel with, don't we? That's not our job. Our job is to sow the word, period. We can't control the ground that it falls on. That's not our job either. You know who does control that part of it? God. He controls that. If he's either worked on that ground or prepared it or it's not prepared, that's not my concern. That's not your concern. Our job, our commission is to sow the word. And that's what we're supposed to do. And I think that Jesus knew that not everybody was going to accept what he had to say. And he knew that everybody was not going to accept what the disciples, the apostles, had to say as they got sent out to spread this exact same word that he was spreading. He knew that. But you know what? There will be some that will. And that's what we need to be focused on. If they will, that's great. If not, it's not my concern. You go out and you keep on spreading. All right. I hope you guys got something out of it. I'm done.